Okay, welcome back. So sorry for the technical glitch. You cannot trust computers. Um, this is the last session of this edition, and I am welcoming M. Scott Ford. So if you don't know him, is leading the Corgibytes technical team. And Corgibytes, they do consulting, but mostly they are experts in legacy code. The first time I heard about that, I heard about Scott, was when I came across the Legacy Code Rocks podcast, which I strongly encourage you to go and listen if you never heard about that. It's a gold mine of um, experience, feedback, tips, and all of that around legacy code and how to tackle legacy code bases. So there is the podcast, and there is also the community. I mentioned at the very beginning of the conference that I am also part of the Legacy Code Rocks Slack community. Maybe some of the community are here in the audience. It's a really friendly community of people who have to deal with legacy code, and most of us are enjoying it actually. And we are having a virtual meetup every week. So if that's something you want to get into, and you're curious and you want to connect beyond this conference, I invite you to come and see us. I will drop the link in the chat later. But for the moment, please welcome Scott. Scott, up to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for the introduction, Nico. So as said, hi, I'm Scott, and I love to fix bugs. Like I genuinely love to fix bugs. And early in my career, I would move from job to job, and whenever I got to a new job, I was told, go fix bugs as a way to learn the system. And that was a kind of an introduction into whatever I was about to be working with, and a deep dive into the ins and outs of the system I was working with. And I had a lot of fun triaging issues and fixing bugs and solving all these problems. But then one day, on every one of those teams, I was told in a moment that was relatively random to me, that it was time to stop working on bugs and that it was time to start working on features instead. Because, the message being that features were more than just a bug. Sorry, features were more important than bugs, and that fixing bugs was really just a learning exercise. And I always got really sad about this because I really, really enjoyed fixing the bugs. And most of these teams had tons of bugs, like leaps and piles, and lots of issues that needed to be fixed. And um, so it wasn't that there wasn't enough work to do. There was more than enough work to do. It was just deemed to not be a priority. And so on a lot of these teams, I would build out features, but I try to like clean up messes while I built out features, and maybe like sneak in some cleanup while I'm building out new features. But I would kind of get my hands slapped and told, like, no, you need to go back to just focus on the features. Don't focus on the cleanup. And I would get sad and really frustrated, and eventually I'd end up looking for another job, and the cycle would repeat itself. And that was a scenario that I found myself in, over and over again, until I did decide to start my own company where I could focus on just helping teams clean up messes, because that's what I still really enjoy doing. And then over the years, I really started to think, like, this distinction between features and bugs, like, is it really a distinction? Are they different? Because when we look at it, both features and bugs change behavior of the system. So fixing a bug corrects an existing capability, and adding a feature adds a new capability. Both are changing, and you need both activities in order to have a healthy software system. Like if you never add any features, then you're not gonna grow. And if you never fix any bugs, then you're gonna have really frustrated users. And this is something that it's really stuck with me over the years. And I first noticed this when I was using Bugzilla, Mozilla's bug tracking system ages ago, and it only had one issue type, and that was bug. And when I dug into the philosophy of why that this was their philosophy. Their philosophy was everything's a bug because everything needs to be fixed, whether it adds behavior or changes behavior. In the eyes of the user who needs that behavior, it's still a bug. And so the that was the main motivation behind that system, and that really stuck with me. This idea that bugs can be just as important as features, and fixing a bug can be just as important as adding in a new feature, especially if you're improving the life of a user who's struggling with a bug or who's really frustrated by it. And something I've also noticed throughout my career is that there's this pressure to defer maintenance. Like bug fixes are just one kind of maintenance that we see on software systems. But there are all kinds of maintenance that gets deferred in, under the guise of we need to keep creating new features. We need to ship out, new functionality. It always has to be the new shiny. We always have to be giving the users more and more and more. But this deferred maintenance can have a cost, and it can lead to, it can start out relatively simple at first. The idea that like, oh, we can just upgrade that later. When it comes to dependencies, but eventually, like we can start encountering crashes, or we could have the occasional, strange behavior or strange data loss because of a bug that we haven't tracked down. We can get users that are frustrated with their user experience, and they can end up becoming angry, and their productivity is impacted, and then the software developer productivity is impacted. Users can get to the point where they just can't get their work done at all. You can have security vulnerabilities pop up and never get addressed, and so that leads to breaches and bad press, and that can lead to market share loss. And it feels like there's this potential for this domino to go down. And one thing that has really stuck with me over the years is that whenever I encounter a system that is like really hard to use, it makes me think that like it's the result of lots of deferred maintenance. And one of the areas where I encountered this most recently was when I was applying for an SBA disaster relief loan several months ago for my business, and that was the worst website I've ever used. Which I had somebody like laugh at that, because I've used a lot of really bad websites, and I've worked on a lot of really bad websites. And I'll pause and say that I approach systems with the idea that everyone who's worked on them has done their absolute best. And so if anybody happens to be watching this who has worked on that system, I genuinely believe that you're doing your best, and that the state of that system is really, really challenging. It's really, really hard to work with. There were user input fields that I couldn't backspace in. If I wanted to change a value, I had to do Control A to select all the text, and then hit space, because I couldn't hit backspace, but I could hit space, and then I could left arrow key, but I couldn't right arrow key. Like it was like lots of really weird glitches. Like I couldn't tab between fields, and it was this huge form. It was taking every request cycle was really slow. There were tons of request cycles every time I interacted with a site. And like that had me thinking, like, if this is what it's like for the user, the public facing portion of this website, what's it like on the back end? Because in my experience, it's been that the experience on an application like that is much worse for the people who are behind the scenes, and who like are not the public. That those portions of an application are even harder to work with. And so that kind of really has me leads me to my next point, which is that like fixing bugs is good for business. When you fix a bug, it's helping you retain an existing customer. It's helping you keep an existing customer happy. The new features you add are there to kind of help you attract new customers and attract new business, and that's an important part. But you really do need both, and you have external pressures to change the system. These are both external pressures. The bug reports, are not like the system itself doesn't tell you, hey, I have a bug. For the most part, it's responding to user behavior. It's responding to users doing something, and you're getting this request from an actual user that says, hey, I want this to work slightly differently. And you can also think about like compliance issues. So like if there's a law in your municipality or your wherever you live, and that law is changed, like how would you classify the fact that you have to change your system to comply with the law? Is that a bug or is that a feature? And so like there's lots of teams that like get really obsessed with this distinction between features and bugs. And like to me, I think this distinction often comes down to like whether we think the activity is boring or whether we think it's exciting. And there's definitely a bias in our field towards working on things that we find exciting. There's a very strong bias towards innovation. There's a bias towards trying to always do the new thing. I had a colleague introduce me to the phrase resume-driven development several months ago. This idea that you want the technologies you're working on now to be ones that will help you get your next job. And we have a society in general that just glorifies maker and hacker culture. There's Make Magazine and Maker Faire, and there are organizations that hold hackathons, and I, so many people who I meet who are software developers and who work in software, they think that bug fixes are boring and they think that maintenance work is boring. But I love it. And so I've often kind of gone through the world feeling like there's no place for me, because I didn't identify with a maker and kind of that activity. And one way this really sunk home for me was when my business partner and wife Andrea, we were walking through a Barnes and Noble, and we came across this table, and it was like, join the maker movement, learn how to build it yourself. And there's all of these like really cool resources for how to get started on a home automation project, or how to get involved in computing or working with small little Arduinos. And it was really, really neat and a really, really nice set of resources. But it had me thinking, like, where's the table with this stuff for me? Like, where's the table for how to repair it yourself? Where's the table for for taking something and making it better or improving upon it? Why is there a table like dedicated to creating brand new things, but there's not a table for making things better? And so as Andre and I were talking about it, she had the idea that maybe it's kind of like introverts and extroverts, and how extroverts get a lot more attention because of just the way they interact with the world. But introverts are needed too. Like, introverts are an important role to play. And so we started thinking about, well, maybe there's a counterpoint to maker. And so Andre and I started brainstorming different terms that might kind of be a counterpoint to being a maker. And we came up with lots of possibilities, and really started thinking about how healthy projects need more than one kind of developer, and it would be helpful if we had a name for that. And so we thought about fixer, and that didn't quite work, and so thought maybe alliteration would work. So like maker, and like, is there something that improves things that's similar to maker? And that's when we came up with Mender. And so that was like this kind of continuum of people who like making things and people who like mending things. And so I started giving talks and asking people in the audience, for a show of hands for who likes inheriting projects from other people. And about maybe 10% of hands would go up from amongst the software developers in the room. But those hands that went up were like really exciting. Like, they were like, oh, me, that's me. And I'd have those people come up to me after the talk and say, like, I found my people. Thank you so much. Like, I have a name to call myself. And they were really, really, like, really pleased. And so I started to like thinking like, okay, well, maybe this is a thing that's worth exploring more. And um, so I started thinking of like, well, there's another term that annoys me a little bit too, and that's hacker. And because I think hacker kind of gets misused a lot, in my opinion. um, I think of hacker as a tinkerer, not hacker as a criminal. But a lot of society thinks of hacker as a criminal. um, but at the same time, like I don't like I'll tinker sometimes, but I don't like to tinker with the stuff I'm going to ship. For the stuff I'm going to ship, I like to like put craft into it. I really like to think of myself more as a crafter. And so that kind of got me thinking of like, what would a what would we call someone who's a maker and a crafter? Um, and like that's a feature builder. That's someone who's like really really good at building features and they love it. And I feel like most teams try to hire for this. Um, they're looking for people who fit really really well in this category. They're really good at making things and they're really good at building them with like really incredible quality. Um, and at the same time, there are other roles. There are other supporting roles that are needed on a team. And so that kind of got me thinking like, what would a maker hacker be called? And like, oh well, that's a rapid prototyper. And that's another term that we hear a lot is like your rapid prototyping. And there's a real need for this, especially in the really early phases of a project when you don't know how users are going to react to things and you want to be able to respond and adapt really quickly. Having somebody who's really good at that, like really good at throwing experiments together quickly and then getting them in front of users and getting their feedback, um, like that's someone who you will really need on your team when you have a system or a feature that's kind of in that state where it needs that feedback in order to get better. And then, kind of this other portion of the quadrant with like, hacker and mender, like that's an emergency responder or a site reliability engineer. This is somebody who enjoys getting the call at 3 a.m. or maybe not enjoys, but like they're driven by it. They're really good at it. This is, kind of their passion. They like making sure that things work and getting things fixed quickly and solving problems. And then last but not least is where I feel like I fit in most, which is, in the mender crafter portion of the quadrant, where like a software remodeler. Um, I don't enjoy responding to emergencies as much, even though I do think of myself as a mender. I would rather do the cleanup after an emergency. So if an emergency responder is kind of like a firefighter, then you can think of a software remodeler as someone who comes up and cleans up the damage that was caused by putting out the fire. So the emergency responder got the fire put out quickly and they saved the structure and they got the emergency solved. But now in doing so, they created a giant mess. And the software remodeler can come in and like take that giant mess and have a lot of fun with it and have a lot of fun cleaning it up. And that's where I really like to play. And so given this framework, it's helpful to look at each of these traits one by one and try to assess how do you know when your project needs each of these roles, and how do you know whether or not a person on your team kind of fits in one of these slots really well, so that you can match the right people with the right need and move people around to keep people happier, so that you won't have a situation like I had where I would have really enjoyed having software remodeling tasks assigned to me on a project. And when I didn't get them, I left. So, making sure that you're matching people with the tasks that they're going to enjoy doing so that you don't lose them. So up first, we'll take a look at the rapid prototyper. And you know that your project is in need of someone in this quadrant when it's a completely brand new concept that you're facing. When you need like a new idea and you need it in a hurry. When there are tons of unknowns about how to get it done or how people are going to react or what's possible or what's performant enough. There's so many unknowns that have to be teased out. There's often market validation that's required, where you have to get something in front of a user and get them to try it and give you feedback on it, because you're blind to that. You think that you might have a way to solve a problem, but until somebody actually tries to use it, you don't really know. There's the other another I think it's like Sun Tzu, who said like, no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. I think like that's kind of like the same thing as, um, the validation is often required to know that like you've built the right thing. This People with this project type are also really helpful when you've got something that just might get canceled, um, uh, because they'll be just willing to move on to the next thing, and it won't be as attached to what they've built. It is what I find. Or it's something that's like purely got a short shelf life. Like it's going to be used for an event, and then once the event's over, it's never going to be used again. So having something that just put together really quickly, put together well, but put together really quickly, um, is what you're looking for. Or if there's a really tight deadline, I find that people who like are in this quadrant really enjoy and really thrive off of that adrenaline rush. And so I've talked a little bit about the people traits as I've gone through kind of the project traits. Um, and so like, adaptable, optimistic, inventive, like this like idea of like, creating something out of nothing or trying new things over and over again. And are willing to just say like, just ship it, just get it out the door. So next up, let's take a look at feature builder. So your project is in need of a feature builder when you're already in an established market. When you do need new things to be added to your system, and you want to make sure they're built well. And you're in a situation where you've got users and you've got happy users, but your users need more. They need more out of your system in order to continue using it. And I find in this situation, the return on investment in this area is very measurable. You're able to see that you spend money on building out new features, and then you can easily measure whether or not you got more customers. And so it's pretty easy to measure your ROI here, which is why I think a lot of people who are responsible for software applications, they're most interested in hiring here because it's got the most kind of direct spend versus reward relationship. And if your project has kind of fewer unknowns than the rapid prototyper quadrant, then there's still going to be some, but for the most part, you've kind of established the patterns for like what problem you're solving, what market you're focusing, who your personas are, things of that nature. And now you're really just trying to turn up the good, as I hear Woody's will say. Find ways to continue doing what you're doing now, but do it even better. And when you're in this situation, stability really matters, which is why having people who really care about their craft is very helpful. And the goal of this is growing your user base and really getting more and more people to use your system and use your application. And so the people that will work really, really well here, when those are the needs, are people who are really, really detailed and quality focused, and they're very deliberate. They take their time and they focus on how well things are built, and they're taking the user into consideration as they're building them. And they just genuinely get excited by building new things. Like that's what drives them, is they're working on something that's new. They're solving a new problem. They're carving out a new space. They're making, and they're using that to make people's lives easier. And they tend to also be very pragmatic. So not trying to build the most beautiful thing that can't fly. Like they are still focused on building things that will ship. In the emergency responder quadrant, that you're here when like your site is just down all the time. You're like tons of crashes. You've got loss of business function, frequent customer complaints, a poor net promoter score. If you have any of those, if you're in that situation where like things seem to be down all the time, there always seems to be a fire. You can never seem to get any feature work done. Your team is never getting any feature work done because it's always putting out fires. And this is likely what your team is in the most in need of. It needs people who are really, really good at this. But having all of your energy focused here can be frustrating. But when that's what your system needs, that's kind of the state you're in. And The people who work really well with that are like going to be those that are incredibly adaptable. They're like able to jump from task A to task B and bounce all over the place and have multiple things that are like half finished and half done, and thrive under pressure. And really like they're able to very quickly and under pressure, find a solution to the problem that is being experienced at the time. And they're willing to defer the root cause investigation. They don't need to like figure out exactly why it's gone wrong or exactly how to keep it from going wrong again. They're just able to just get it fixed and move on. So that root cause investigation is something that like they're able to kind of distance themselves from and say like, that's not what we're doing today. We're fixing the problem, and we're moving on. And that is what really helps them investigate and solve issues quickly, and experiment with different solutions and get them out rapidly as well. So those are all things that are like really, really crucial and important if you find yourself in that emergency responder, needing that and needing to identify whether or not you have somebody like that to help you out. In the software remodeler quadrant, the project traits that I find that best benefit from someone in this quadrant are you have a legacy system. So I imagine that's of interest to everyone who's here today. Like given that we're talking about the legacy of Socrates and the different ways to handle legacy systems and different ways to grapple with legacy systems. These are the people who you want to have you working on your legacy systems. If you've got unaddressed security vulnerabilities on your system, it's really risky to deploy it. Deploying is something that people are afraid of doing. That's a scenario or a situation where a software remodeler could really help you. If there's tons of technical debt, and it's harder and harder to make changes to the system, however you define technical debt, then having a software remodeler will help you a lot. If you're in a situation where change just requires an immense amount of effort, and the bug list seems to be huge and it's ever growing and just continues to grow, then these are the kind of people who you want on your team. I find that they're very deliberate. They're really good at just kind of making things better bit by bit. They'll just like very slow and steady make things better over time. They have a real focus on quality as well, and making sure that they imbue a bit of craft and while they're improving things. They take this brutal persistence to problems that other people might ignore or find too frustrating. They just dive in and like, I will solve this. This is something that is solvable. I can fix this. And they have that very like positive attitude around things being possible to be fixed and cleaned up. And they really are good at kind of polishing off the rough edges that get left over from either the rapid prototyping phase or cleaning up from emergency response. And that's something that they really enjoy doing. And it's almost like that's the fuel that they need in order to do their job well. If you give them a blank page, then they'll struggle. I know, or if you give them an app that doesn't have any problems, they'll find problems and they'll try to fix them anyway. That's certainly what happens to me. If it's not broken yet, you don't want me to fix it because I will try. I will try to find something that's wrong with it. And also, these are the people who are incredibly good at finding root causes to problems that are coming up over and over and over again, and they'll help you identify how to fix those problems and keep them from coming back again. And so, something that I often get asked a lot when I'm talking about kind of like these traits is like, well, that software remodeler sounds really cool, and it almost sounds like a mythical creature. Like, where would I find those people? And some places where software remodelers hang out, one Nico already mentioned is the Legacy Code Rocks community. We've got the podcast, and we have the Slack community, and then we're trying to restart the newsletter that we used to put out, and then we've got our weekly virtual meetup as well. And so that's a great place to hang out and meet other software remodelers if you are one, or find one to hire if you need one. Just a great place to hang out. Another place to look for people like this, so software crafters organization, because there's a big overlap between kind of the mender and the crafter and the software remodeler. I find that a lot of people who like mending also hang out in the crafter orgs, and so you can find people who are like eager and willing to dive in and help you clean up a system over there. Maintainerati is an organization that's also focused on maintenance. Their focus is more on open source maintenance, but a lot of the qualities and characteristics of an open source maintainer I find are very similar with a successful software remodeler. There's a lot of overlap there, so that can be a good place to find a software remodeler as well if you need one. And then also another organization called the Maintainers was born out of an article written by Lee Benzel and Andrew Russell called "Hail the Maintainers," which got a lot of press a few years ago, and they recently just came out with a book called "The Innovation Delusion." I think it just was published yesterday, so go buy a copy if that sounds at all exciting to you. But they have a community that focuses on maintenance, not just in software, but across all of our society. So maintenance in municipal contexts, and in government, and in physical spaces such as like civil engineering with bridges and HVAC systems and the buildings that you live in and work in, and that's all across society. Which there's a lot of those things have software involved too. So that's also a great place to kind of hang out and kind of get ideas from other aspects of from other industries. So that's kind of like my philosophy for how software developers, kind of fit into different buckets. Something to keep in mind though is that like we're humans, we're not like bytes and bits, so we don't always cleanly fit into just one category or one bucket. I find that a lot of these divisions are more continuum, where people have preferences for one or the other, but those preferences can change over time, and they can change based on context. So, like if my context is that I've been doing software remodeling work for 2 years and I need a break, then maybe I'll want a rapid prototyping project as kind of like a palate cleanser, but I won't want to do it for super long. Or emergency response might be something that I'm eager to dive in and help on in order to identify patterns or learn new things. Or I'm someone who likes to do feature development, but I'm bored with it and I need a break, and so like doing something else for a little bit would be helpful. So as you start to think about who you have where and how to move people around, that's something to keep in mind as well, is that these shifts and these preferences might not be permanent, but they might be largely based on the context that people find themselves in. So that's all I have for you today. I have intentionally left time for questions, so hopefully you have some. And if you'd like to get in touch afterwards, here's my contact info. I'd love to chat with anyone about anything I've talked about or just legacy code in general. I love this stuff. So, thanks.
In the meantime, thank you very much, Scott. I didn't know about the maintainers and maintainerity.
Maintainerati. Yeah.
Maintainerati. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's from Berlin. My best friend is working in Berlin. Oh my God, there are so much things in Berlin.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fantastic group. They have their own conferences as well. And I met the Maintainers did a conference a couple years ago, pre-COVID, in Washington D.C., and there were some members from the Maintainerati organization who attended that as well. And there was like a software track at the Maintainers conference. They had other tracks that were focused on like digital systems and then like physical systems and infrastructure and things like that. But they had a software track, and that's where I met the folks from the Maintainerati community.
That's nice. Yeah, I didn't know about that. So thank you very much. Yeah, got feedback from the chat. Really good presentation, really inspiring. I really like how you managed to put words on the traits that, like, the things that we feel. Like you feel that you enjoy doing some things like that are considered not like mainstream, for example. And being able to put words on that, it's so relieving. So
Yeah.
I'm really
Yeah,
glad.
I think I benefit a lot from having a business partner and wife who's also just an expert copywriter, and that helps a lot when putting really good names to things. So Andre deserves a lot of credit for like all the names that we've coined over the years, and kind of all the terminology distinctions that have been developed.
Yeah, well, you have done an amazing job with that, and it reminds me. It was the same impression I had when I met the software crafters community. So people may or may not like the name, but what what I really liked was that I was looking for this thing, like how to improve testing, how to improve the way we code, how to improve how to be more efficient when I'm tackling existing code. And it's easier to find resources and things to learn from when you have a name, when you have a name for it.
Yes. Yeah, because like when you know what to search for, then you can like type that into the search box. But when you don't know what to search for, it's incredibly hard to type that into the search box.
Exactly.
Yeah, so giving names to things is really useful.
Yeah, and finding other people who also consider themselves the same way, and finding your community, it's really helpful.
Yeah, especially
Uh,
if you feel like an outcast and you feel like you're told that you're not supposed to like this because nobody else does, and
yeah,
which is what I feel like I was told for a good 10, 12, 15 years of my career before I decided to just be obstinate and like, no, I'm only going to take clients that need this work.
yeah. And as you said, you can like as a human being, you don't necessarily fit into one box. So you actually
Exactly.
probably are more than that. And you did a nice experiment last time. Uh, and people were able to say, okay, I feel I'm more like a software remodeler, but I sometimes I also feel like I'm emergency responder. I like that. And personally, for example, I do enjoy a lot working with existing code, but I do also enjoy. Sometimes it depends, but when I have an idea, I want to start from a blank page and create something new. So yeah, I switch between these two modes, and
Yeah. Yeah. I find my favorite area is um, I like to bridge old and new.
mm,
So if there's like an older technology that, it's working, but it's old and like maybe there's functionality that just needs to be harvested. Like that's the kind of thing that I like diving into, which like there's a lot of new and a lot of creation that goes into that. Um, but it's it's like rubbing up against something that's old, and so you
mm,
have that friction of how to work with something that's existing.
yeah, I see. We do have one question, which is, where does TDD fit into all of this? So who does TDD according to you?
Oh, so I well, I would like to think that TDD is a practice that most people apply to their work to validate that what they're working on is good. That's how I validate that the code that I've written does what I think it does. However, I would think that you're more likely to find people on the crafter end of that, on the maker hacker, the hacker crafter line that I drew. You're probably more likely to find people who are practicing TDD on the crafter end of that spectrum than on the hacker end of that spectrum. And that's kind of just been my experience, is that um, people who are excuse me, putting things together very quickly, and they value putting things together quickly. Testing is something that they don't value as much, or automated testing, I should say, is something they don't value as
Mm,
much. Um, and so, because I think they're trying to optimize for, well, what if it works the first time?
mm,
Where I think like the real benefit that you get from the test that you create with TDD, and the real benefit you get from TDD is, you know, having a test suite that you can run continually and can help you like steer you in the right direction, help you kind of emerge a really good design out of a problem. And that's something that I think somebody who's like intentionally trying to move very fast, that's not
mm.
something they're as interested in.
Yeah, I can see that, and just like some practices regarding like software architecture, we sometimes recommend that people don't get too much into it when they are, for example, doing a hackathon or that kind of
Right.
prototype mode where you need to use different skills and different traits. So you need to adapt the situation.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like a big design up front for a hackathon project is probably not the way to go. Like all that you'll put together is a UML diagram of this beautiful thing that might exist one day, right? Whereas if you want to like actually have something that people can use, then you end up skipping a lot of steps that other people might consider to be important.
Yeah, despite in my experience also, it's quite common to have people prototyping and then you send the prototype to production and
Yes.
you're working with that kind of situation. So I also can see where people are coming from when they ask such a question.
Yeah, I think like cross corner on that diagram happens where like the wrapper prototype will get shipped and all of a sudden you need a software remodeler in order to clean it up. And then you'll find yourself in the like emergency responder category, and the solution that's proposed is like, well, if we just rewrote it from scratch, then we could do it right and we could avoid being in this quadrant. Where I feel like kind of going around the corners is usually more helpful. So like if you find yourself in a wrapper prototype, moving in the direction of like, okay, like actually building out some features and doing it with quality and care. And then, same thing if you're in the emergency response category, kind of like moving down around software remodeling and getting yourself back into the feature development that way, instead of just trying to go straight to the opposite corner.
Yeah, that makes me think that, again, a lot of things in what we do is not much about code and computers, but also a lot about people and communication.
Yeah, communication is at least 90% of our job. But I think the kind of communication that so many of us prefer is communication with the computer. And that's the code that we're writing. The communication with the other humans that we work with is important too.
Yeah, that's true. Anyway, that was really fun, really insightful also. Thank you a lot, Scott, for being part of this. Again, I invite anyone in the audience to, join us in Slack and to continue that kind of discussions. I think we're going to wrap it up with Adi.